So I'm going to start with this part about the effects of environmental stress on the animals themselves, the habitats, and so on. Okay, so the big idea generally is, of course, we will time with what you have learned so far about increase in global temperatures and so on, and extreme weathers. Okay, as you have seen just now in the video, you may not expect this in Singapore, but yes, we may have a little bit of such extreme weather. Well, that's not even considered anything big. If you have been staying overseas, you know how a hurricane looks like. That's just one of those small ones. Okay, so these are the areas which we'll look at how they are going to have impacts on the habitats on themselves. In terms of a couple of species, we'll share some examples. Any food chains that are affected along the line, and of course, how is their niche shifted or not. Okay, okay, so based on your notes, this is what I've come up with. Okay, so in general, of course, we cannot escape the problems of temperature lah. Temperature has always been something which has every impact, very direct impact on every animal that you can think of. Now, the other area which is seldom covered, and I think it's pretty important for you to know. In fact, this word was not brought up in the syllabus, but we know that it's an important word, and that's the idea of phenology. Now, what does phenology mean? Basically, it is actually the personality traits, or in this case, the characteristics of the organism. Now, what are their lifestyle like? Okay, so we talk about basically their role and their lifestyle. All right, so how will it come into play in the overall picture? And of course, if you're talking about affecting them in terms of food sources, right, that will be the water and food resources lah. Because basically, in nature, as you can see, for every oasis, there's always water, right? So that is their main thing, the spring of life for them. All right, and of course, for wild animals, we're talking about places to raise the young. Okay, just bear this in mind that examples will also include plants lah. So for plants, a good patch of soil will probably be good enough. But for animals, it will be a place to groom and grow their young. All right, and ultimately, I also cover a little bit of the idea of niche shifts. That means how would their roles and the places that they reside in move and their range and all that. Okay, so if you're talking about temperature, right? Basically, temperature change will obviously be an overall impact due to the idea of global warming. Okay, in fact, it will warm everything, including the ocean, because it's one of the biggest heat sinks as well. All right, so of course it will affect many organisms, including the fishes and corals and so on. So which will be one of the topics that we will cover, because coral bleaching appears to be one of the common topics in Cambridge anyway. And of course, the iconic polar bears. Okay, so we'll talk about the polar bears. I'm just going to show a little video. Hopefully this will give you a better picture as to how climate change affects animals directly. Okay, so enjoy the video.
The polar bear is the quintessential symbol of climate change. Its habitat is melting, but global warming also affects other animal species all over the world. Every added degree of temperature has its consequences. What effect does climate change have on animals? With global warming, the vegetation in large areas of the Earth changes, and with it, the food the animals live on. Take the koala, for instance. Its habitat is eucalyptus forests, and its main food, the leaves of the trees. But too much carbon dioxide in the air changes the chemical composition of the eucalyptus leaves, making them toxic to koalas and threatening these highly specialized marsupials with extinction. Other species can react to climate change by fleeing. Researchers have calculated that on average species move nearly 17 kilometers towards the north and south poles, or climb about 11 meters higher in the mountains every 10 years, searching for cooler places to live. That's 3 times faster than previously thought. They look for new habitats that are as similar as possible to their old ones. Storks are more often going further to the northeast to nest. These birds find their food in moist earth, and wetland areas in Central and Western Europe are shrinking. A few species benefit from climate change, the bark beetle, for instance. With rising temperatures, it's spread ever further, damaging trees and entire forests, and that in turn destroys the habitats of other animals. In general, the more adaptable a species, the greater its chances of survival. But some species react more sensitively to change than others. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change predicts that 1 in 3 species will die out if global warming continues.
Okay, so you saw from the video, right, that not everybody suffers. There are some pest species like that wood boring beetle that is actually having a good time. Now, but eventually, you know the idea of the entire ecosystem. If it collapses, right, there are no trees left and everything dies. So even the pest itself will get wiped out. Okay, I have another video here on coral gardening, but I'm not going to go into that because basically this is just one of the ways of having it sustainable, because corals can actually be farmed. Okay, so I'm going to move on, but this is just one of the ways that we can alleviate and try to recreate the habitats and the environment for the species. Okay, so I'm going to move on now. The rising temperatures, right, basically not just affects plants and animals in general, but we also talk about how it may change their behavior. Okay, so when behavior comes in, right, we'll be talking about the phenology. Right, phenology actually represents basically a overall style, or should I say, the representation of what you think this animal should be like. Like for example, polar bears are supposed to be like that, and then maybe an animal is supposed to be like that. So we try to attribute certain certain features to their style of living. Now, of course, we also know that they play certain roles that are very important, and this would be something like, for example, in a pollinator, right? All right, the plant will be dependent on pollinator, and of course, in the general thing with things, in general, like for example, in this case, in the food chain that's shown here, you can see that we're talking about the predator-prey relationships. All right. So just now in the video, you saw that some of these birds and insects actually can migrate. So their migration to new places will also mean the arrival of prey for some species or even predators. All right. And in case you're wondering what these small little things are, well, this is actually what we're talking about, the phytoplankton, or in this case, the ice algae. Now, there's a lot of algae that's actually trapped in ice, and typically, if you know, one of the things about rising sea temperature is that the sea ice will start to melt. Now, with the melting, there will be a release of such ice algae, which were trapped in the snow originally, and some of them will start to reproduce and be reanimated. And these may actually provide a food source for certain species, but as anything that's introduced, it will also create issues for whatever that's existing at that point. All right, so there are pros and cons to it, lah. Okay, so I was harping a lot on this phenology term, right? Phenology has multiple aspects to it. In a sense, for every animal, right, we're talking about its capacity to migrate, lah. Even for plants, capability to make flowers, how they nest, how they mate, and all that. All right. So climate change is causing a whole host of problems with the phenology of animals. Okay, because of the changing environmental cues, now animals and plants don't know how to respond, or they respond accordingly, and perhaps that resulted in a misalignment, all right, between them and their co-partners, in this case the symbiotic partners, or like between the prey and a predator, right? If the prey doesn't arrive in time, the predators will starve to death. Or in the case of a plant and its pollinator, now if the plant blooms its flowers, and you know flowers don't last unless they are those annual flowers, or these perennial flowers. But in this case, those flowers, once they bloom, they have a specific timeline where if they don't get pollinated, then they will lose their capacity to do anything, because that's the objective in the first place. All right, so the bees, in this case, let's use a bee as example. If it doesn't come along to pollinate the flowers, then we also have a problem, because uh, you know the bees don't get what they need in terms of the pollen and to make honey and all that, and the flowers don't get a chance to get themselves pollinated. All right. Okay, so this is an example of a picture. This is a hummingbird. Maybe you might not be aware, hummingbird has one of those fastest fluttering wings, as you can see there. All right, hummingbird is so small, and these wings are really moving so fast that they actually spend 99% of their energy just for flying. All right, it's an interesting way to live a life, but the funny thing is they don't eat, they won't have energy to do that, and they can fall flat and die. All right, so their life typically depends on the food that they get. Okay, so if the flowers don't come along when they're there, they will all just die and the species might go extinct. So for them, literally, it is eat to live. Okay. Okay, so for the food, right, we're also talking about the fact about migration. Right, just now we also talk about the fact that whether they come along and whether there's food for them and all that. So if you're talking about migration, now basically for animals like the falcons and the hawks and all these little birds of prey, right? They typically wait for the migration to come to supplement their diet so that they have enough for them to lay eggs for themselves and groom the next generation. Because once the chicks come out, if the prey has not arrived, then the chicks won't make it. All right, so there typically won't be enough prey in the local vicinity for them to sustain through this breeding season. So with the migration comes life for them actually. All right. So while we were talking about nesting and all that, there was also this idea about the place to raise your young. Okay, so one of the interesting things that we noted in the current situation of weather changes is droughts. Droughts has been a big issue, especially for a lot of birds that survive in the wetlands. Right, drought is the biggest issue, and the arrival of drought not only decimates the land in terms of changing the salinity and killing off all the trees and everything. In fact, mangrove has been known to be one of those nurseries, right, for raising young, not just for the birds to put their nest on top, and it's also a nursery for the fishes to come along, right? If you go into any mangrove forest, you'll find a lot of young, small fry of fishes and shellfish and all these things there, right? So if you're talking about that will also impact in terms of phenology the behavior of the prey. The prey species, let's say the birds or the insects, they might migrate because of the environmental changes. If there's no water here, one way that they have to find water is to move lah. So they will fly, and as they move away, um, if let's say they move earlier than expected or even later than expected, then this will cause an issue because this will not coincide with the breeding season of the predator, and this will end up causing them to starve to death in a sense. Okay, so if you understand that, that's basically what it means. Okay, so this is an extreme example. On the right is a picture of a wallaroo, a smaller kind of kangaroo, wallaby. I think it's wallaby. Yeah, wallaby. All right, it's stuck on one of those moles because of a sudden flash flood in Australia. All right, flash floods are now very common, and once it comes, it's not exactly like a small puddle. Okay, it's a lot. And the picture on the right is actually a cheetah family. Okay, cheetahs are going extinct. Interestingly, you can still find them in zoos around the world, but a recent genetics test by a group of researchers have found that these cheetahs were actually from the same family. That means what happened was their supplier, right, the guy who went to catch these fellas for them, was actually taking from a very small group of cheetahs. That means that even if they try to exchange cheetahs and breed in a breeding program, it's not going to work because there'll be bottlenecking and the genetic diversity is going to be very, very limited. So cheetah is one of those with a very small gene pool, and they are really on the fringe. All right, their existence is really on the edge already. Okay, also because they have no place to breed. One of the reasons why they were taken into captivity in the first place was because a lot of the habitats were either destroyed by human habitat needs, like people who live there or farm there, or the fact that they were overtaken by other stronger predators, right? Because where they are found, it's very difficult for them to compete against the leopards lah, and all the rest of the bigger predators. Okay, next we comes to the idea of niche shifts. All right, niche shifts, right, is an ecological term. You may come across this before, but if you have not, basically, as the name suggests, it means there's a movement, there's a change in the niche. Now, the niche of an organism can mean its particular role. It can also incidentally be referred to its particular habitat, because its role may actually be tied together where it is found. Okay, so if you're talking about where it is found in this particular role, let's say a particular animal that does this particular job and it's found in this place, then because of environmental changes, right, climatic changes, it has decided to expand its range. It can move further than it should, or it may shrink. So either way, as you can see, that the migration is quite common with animals. If it is not good here, we just move lah. Huh? So if that's the case, so if the climatic niche may actually shift, this will have impact on the species that where they roam into. That means the range will be expanded. If it's empty, of course, no man's land is fine. But if there's somebody else already there, then there will be displacements. All right. Okay, and if it doesn't work out, if you can't move and the original place that you're staying in is not going to be good enough for you, or in terms of, let's say, your role, you don't get what you need, then, or you have no longer a role, okay, like you lose a job like that, then you probably go extinct.